What happens on the flip side? Who is your council over there, your galactic team, your galactic mob, your spiritual guide, your spiritual team? We're going to find that out and more. Who's talking to us from the other side? Are they available? With the fabulous Rich Martini on this Mother's Day in May. Stay tuned. Coming up.
You got to accentuate the positive. Wow, I feel good. A little bit of feel good goes a long way.
You're listening to Karen Swain, teacher of deliberate creation, accentuating the positive, showing you a way to a better life.
Accentuating the positive, it's not just fad, it's sanity. Who in their right mind would accentuate anything else?
If you feel like that's what you want to do.
G'day, and welcome to another show, Accentuating the Positive. Always a pleasure to be with you all today. It is Mother's Day. Well, what's the date today? It's the 11th in the US. It's the 12th in Australia. It's actually the day after Mother's Day here. So I want to say Happy Mother's Day to everyone that's listening.
Happy Mother's Day to you and to all my friends in Australia, down under.
Down under. It was Mother's Day for us yesterday. We've got the fabulous Rich Martini on the show. You're listening to Karen Swain, Accentuating the Positive, Awakening, Expanding Consciousness on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network on 107.7 and 105.3 FM syndicated radio all over the place. Because it's Mother's Day, I'm sure lots of you are out giving your mothers lots of love or eating or doing something. We haven't got anyone in the comments at the moment, which is so unusual. So it might be a quiet show today. But I tell you what, Rich has got a lot to share, so it doesn't matter. Oh, hello, Wade Showy, you're here.
Well, we can make up questions, right? Of course.
Hello from Gloria. Hello, darling one. Happy Mother's Day. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the mothering energy today, but we've got lots to chat about. Rich and I have been chatting. He said, what do you want to do? Because I get people to come on half an hour before. He said, shall I go and come back or should we chat? But we started chatting and the time just flew, didn't it, Rich? It just flew.
And you and I have had chats before, and I know that they're just full of wild details and very interesting stuff. And how many years? 6 years, right?
6 years ago. Yeah, 6 years ago. You came on the show a couple of times. I think you talked to our little tribe in the inner sanctum. We had a small live audience quizzing you, and I think that was a 3-hour conversation, 3.5-hour conversation when we had our little tribe on. So that was before.
With the two of us, you wind either one of us up and we can go forever, obviously.
That's absolutely right. Wind us up and we never stop.
Well, I was thrilled.
Hang on. Let me just tell people that are listening a little bit about you. So Rich Martini is an award-winning filmmaker, writer, director, and author who has written and or directed 8 theatrical features and a number of documentaries. His first book, he's got lots of books, which we're going to talk about. Flipside, A Tourist Guide to How to Navigate the Afterlife, went to #1 twice on Amazon in all genres. And you've got another book called, where are we? It's a Wonderful Afterlife. Let me just go and bring your books up. Here we go. Where are they? So, yeah, last time we spoke 6 years ago, we spoke about these books. Hacking the Afterlife, It's a Wonderful Afterlife. You've got it in Spanish, I see there, and The Flip Side, which is your journey, about how you got into this being a, I want to bring this up. This is what you used to look at that.
Yeah, there we go. I still look like that somewhere in my head.
The beautiful Rich Martini with his gorgeous long dark hair and dark beard. And now you've got, for people listening on radio.
What happened to that guy? Life happened. As you can see, I've got instruments around for the people who are viewing. We got instruments here. I got a keyboard next to me in case something dramatic happens. But yeah, listen, I can just tell your audience that it was about, I don't know how many years ago, that my close friend, 1996, my close friend, Luana Anders, passed away in my arms. And she started visiting me afterwards. And at first I thought, I must be making that up. But then other people were seeing her, Claire Isabel. And the other thing was that she was younger than I had remembered her, of course, than the last time I'd seen her. So she was coming to visit me so often, I started to think, if she can visit me, she must exist. So therefore, how do I visit her? Where can I go? And I think we talked about this before, where I had an out-of-body experience and I went into deep space. I had no idea where I was going, but I went into what felt like another universe, and I saw her standing there, and she said, you were looking for, telepathically, you were looking for me, here I am. And I wrote about that in the book Flipside. Now, she had this recurring dream that she told this to her hospice care nurse. She had cancer, and when she first told me this, I thought it was the morphine drip that was influencing her. But she had this recurring dream that she was in another universe, talking to people dressed in white who spoke a language that she'd never heard before, but somehow she understood. And that's some shots of Luana. Anyway, and so I got a call from her close friend, Jack Nicholson's ex-wife, who said that she had a dream about Luana, our mutual friend, in the fourth dimension, she said, dressed in white and really happy. And I thought, wow, that's so weird. I mentioned it to the hospice care nurse, and she said that was her recurring dream. And then I picked up a copy of Michael Newton's book, Journey of Souls, some years later. And in that book, during a hypnotherapy session, somebody recalled a lifetime where they saw themselves in another dimension, in a classroom, dressed in white. And I thought, oh, maybe that's where she is. As a filmmaker who's written and directed movies, I thought, well, I'll make a documentary. So I called up Michael Newton and I said, I'd like to do a documentary about your work. And they said, oh, no, he's retired. And, he's not doing that. And then I went to Chicago where they were doing a conference, and I met him. And he said, I'll give you my last interview, which was odd because he didn't pass for another 16 years. But I filmed this 3-hour interview. And then during the interview, trying to be an open-minded skeptic about what he was saying, that people were saying the same things about the afterlife while under hypnosis 4 to 6 hours. And then I started filming people doing that. And then he suggested that I do a session. And I thought, oh, this is great. I can prove it to be false because I did not believe that I was going to go anywhere. You see, that's the bias that people talk about with hypnotherapy. But even though I was prepared to say for 4 hours, I don't see anything, unfortunately, I did see things. And here we are. But that became the book Flipside, which I then, talked about. I had filmed about a dozen people. And I spoke at the University of Virginia, the Department of Perceptual Studies. They had invited me to come and speak to them and present what I had learned. And as they pointed out, hypnotherapy is not a valid tool of science because of bias. But as I pointed out, people were saying the same things. Didn't matter who their therapist was. Didn't matter who was recording. People said the same thing, meeting counsels, meeting guides, meeting teachers, learning the process of incarnation, of how consciousness exists outside the brain, how we choose our lifetimes, plan our lifetimes, hook up with a team before we even get on stage. Everyone has to give us permission to come to join the play. People get, concerned about that. It's disconcerting to hear that they might have agreed to whatever it is they're going through. I understand, but it's not my opinion. It's not my theory, and it's not my belief. It's just what people consistently say. So I've been filming people for 15 years. I started with hypnotherapy cases. I filmed about 100 of those, often with Newton Institute trained hypnotherapists. Then I I was contacted by a medium, Jennifer Schaefer. We have a podcast called Hacking the Afterlife. About 10 years ago, she reached out to me. I didn't know what mediumship was. But when I filmed her accessing people on the other side, it was like, oh my gosh, she's a cell phone. Literally, she could talk to people that I knew and answer questions that I knew the answers to. And she clearly knew the answers as well. That began a collaboration for the past 10 years. Every week we get together. Yeah. About 5 years ago, we started our podcast, and we started continued interviewing. Oddly enough, Luana Anders, my friend, on the flip side, she moderates our podcast. She's in charge of the guest list. People reach out to me all the time, publicists, and say, we'd like to have our client on your show. And I'd say, I'm sorry, I'm not in charge of the guest list. They have to be off planet to get in the show. And Luana is the person with the clipboard, who gets to talk to us. Very unusual, but that's the way it's worked out. But the third modality that I've been working with is guided meditation. What I realized somewhere along the line was that people had access to this information if we could bypass the filters. So Dr. Grayson talks about the filters on the brain in his book After. He's a guy, psychiatrist at UVA, who did near-death experience. They named the scale after him. 45 years. He was on Oprah the other day talking about his research, Oprah's podcast, talking about his incredible research. And I got to meet him and spent some time with him and, learned that he'd been studying near-death experiences. So out of that, I realized, near-death experiences are a science. People do study that from a scientific way. Why don't I see if I can interview people with near-death experiences? And so using hypnotherapy or mediumship or guided meditation, I've been able to have people revisit an event, revisit something that happened to them. Could have been a near-death experience, but it also could have been a dream. It could have been a feeling that their grandfather came to visit them. What I've learned is that we exist, as we know, I'm sure you're aware of it, your audience is aware of it, a time frame. It was Stephen Hawking during an interview with him after he crossed over, where he said, think of life as a series of floppy disks. He used that term. If you pull the floppy disk out and you look at it, it's got math on there, which is all the ones and zeros of that time frame. So if you can access the time frame of Stephen Hawking, he has access to all of his previous lifetimes, all the journey he's been on, and then all the people associated with him. So anybody that he met or knew, it would be a frequency. So some of my books, like Tuning into the Afterlife, are just about musicians because my mom was a concert pianist and I kind of focused on that. The book Architecture of the Afterlife is scientists, doctors, clergy, and divine councils. They're clergy. One was an Episcopal bishop, where we did a simple guided meditation. None of them had ever met me before, so I was able to eliminate that kind of bias. None of them had read my books. The only thing they had in common was doing a simple guided meditation. They'd done guided meditation before and could, say aloud what they were seeing.
Yeah.
And using that rubric, I would do like hour-long sessions. And a friend of mine orchestrated this whole thing, and I had about 20 of them, one from Harvard neuroscientist. And they had never seen or talked to people off stage before, but all of them did. So in essence, you could argue that that's the norm. 100% were able to do it. So it would be paranormal to say you couldn't do it. And so this idea of, and Dr. Grayson talks about it in his book After, page 125. I've been asked so many times, I like to mention it, where filters on the brain block our awareness of what Karen is aware of. This idea of we have these filters that block, but some children don't have them until the age of 8. Remember previous lifetimes, can see people that others cannot. Right?
I was listening to our conversation on the show 6 years ago.
From a while ago, yeah.
And we were talking about, I remember I mentioned you quite like the cone of silence. It's like we're in the cone of silence.
On stage. Well, but then some people don't have it. Now, this is what's interesting for me is in Grayson's talk that he gave called Is Consciousness Produced by the Brain back in 2011. He talks about 70% of the UK hospice care workers, their dementia patients spontaneously recover memory. They call it terminal lucidity, where just prior to passing, the filters die. And suddenly they're seeing people that are in the room and they're remembering their previous, and they're remembering everything. It's all back in their possession. So filters are the issue. So if we can bypass the filters through hypnotherapy, through a medium like yourself, filters are askew for whatever reason. Could be genetic, could be some have an accident, and then afterwards they can.
I mean, you call them filters, but I call them abilities, and I think that you develop them. I think we're all born, psychic. we're all born psychic, and we're operating purely on psychic awareness before our physical senses kick in. Because when a baby is born, the eyes can't see and the ears can't hear. You can't taste anything. You don't touch. Like, all those physical senses have to come online. So here is a soul.
However, some children have access to them. My children did have access. So, for example, my daughter spoke before she was born. Literally, before she came out of her mother, she was talking. And my son's first sentence that he said at age 2 was, "Dad, I was a monk in Nepal." And since then, he was able to prove that he was aware of that lifetime. But around the age of 8, it goes, because the filters, the brain hardens and the filters kick in. But some people have them askew. Abilities is a word that we think of in a pejorative, like some people feel cursed because they can see people off stage, they can see ghosts, etc. But other people, like you say, they're clearly, everyone has mediumship abilities.
Everyone does. Yeah. Well, to my point, I finished what I was saying was, like, when we're born, before our physical senses come online, we are operating solely through our psychic senses. We can read our parents' mind. We can know what everyone else is feeling. We're still in contact with our spirit guides while we're in the baby's body. And then our physical senses come online. We start to smell and see and taste and hear. Pardon?
Did you say cynical or physical?
Physical senses. When the physical senses start to come online, we start to rely on those, and then the psychic senses recede. But as you say, it depends on the child, and it depends on the soul contract, how far they recede. But you can bring them back online. Like I brought them back online, and you can develop them and they can expand. I mean, when I started on radio, I started on with a woman called Pam Bradbury. And she was a school teacher that was interested in psychic ability. And she thought, oh, that's interesting. I'd like to know about that. And so she taught herself, or she went to schools or whatever, but she expanded. And she's been working now as a psychic medium, a professional psychic medium, giving readings to people for like over 30 years. And I was speaking to her the other day, actually. I said, are you retired yet? She said, no, people are still ringing me. But yeah, she said, I wasn't psychic at all as a child that I remember, but I taught myself. I developed those psychic abilities. Yeah. So we can all do it.
Well, I'll give you an example. And we're, just because we're talking about Sydney earlier. When I went to visit Philip Noyce, they were doing the 20th anniversary of Newsfront, a film that he had created that was, the start of the new wave of Australian film directors. And I was staying at his house in Darlinghurst. And he had sold it, so it was empty except for a bed. So the first night that I was there in Darlinghurst, I woke up and I saw above me in the rafters a guy hanging from a noose. And I was startled awake, clearly saw him, and he saw me, but he spoke and he said, I'm sorry. It's just something I feel the need to do. And then as he said that, a ladder appeared underneath him, and he climbed down the ladder. He was wearing a painter's smock. And when he got to the floor, which was a big ladder, got to the floor, he pulled on the rope like it was a trick rope. It wasn't tied, and it fell. And then as it landed on the ground, he disappeared. And so I had lunch with Jan Sharp, Philip's wife, who has since passed away. But Jan and I were having this discussion, and I said, so Jan, what's up with the ghost in your house? She said, what are you talking about? I described him, and then she said, well, the guy who painted our house did hang himself, but he did so a few miles away. And I said, well, Jan, I'm sorry, but clearly he liked being in your house because he's still hanging around.
Ba boom.
But what was interesting about that event, and I must say, my whole life I've seen people on the other side. Okay.
Let me ask you, how old were you when that happened? So you're in Sydney, Australia, in Darlinghurst, which is just up the road from me.
1997.
1997.
But here's my point. Ever since I was a kid, I saw people, I saw ghosts, and I went to my dad and I said, is there such a thing as ghosts? He said, no. And so I just let it go. Well, that must be my imagination. However, in this case, this guy explained to me why he felt the need to do so. You
Why?
see, because it's something I feel the need to do. So the idea of OCD behavior, the idea of something I feel the need to do, wash my hands. I got to wash my hands 100 times. Why do people do that? It's because it comforts them. They feel whatever the lots. So now, is the guy still doing it? Probably not. Eventually, your guide shows up and taps their watch and says, hey, time to go home. And that's what Michael Newton talked about in his work as well. But this guy was interacting with me. And it was one of the first times that I realized, oh, and then Luana passed away subsequently. She was talking to me, taking me places. Anyway, and so the whole idea was I was trying to figure out, well, where are they if they are still in existence? And why is this guy hanging around in a house in Darlinghurst? And since then, I must say, it's probably happened half a dozen times where I'm.
Well, okay, I was going to ask you this. Because you and Jennifer Schaefer have teamed up and you rely on her to be the medium, have those experiences stopped? So when I asked why the ghost showed up in Darlinghurst,
why would they stop?
Have those experiences stopped? So you still
why
see
would
people...
they stop? Why would they stop?
Because you've been relying on Jennifer to be your.
Because I got a substitute teacher, and it's like, oh, I no longer have to take that class. I mean, why would think about it logically? Why would it stop? No, of course. And by the way, I work with many mediums. And now listen, I've always had.
Okay, so let me rephrase the question. Are you still seeing people in the afterlife?
Of course I am. And I work with mediums from all walks of life. And I ask people on the other side the same questions. And so it depends. I mean, I don't see them all day every time, but if I'm staying in an old hotel like I do when I go on coast to coast, I will see a woman sitting at the end of my bed. But I was just about to say, now when I'm talking to somebody who I'm doing a guided meditation with them and they're saying, I always ask, what was the first time you had an experience with spirit? And they'll say, well, I saw a ghost when I was a kid. And then I'll say, would you like to talk to the ghost? I did this with Tony Stockwell. This is a very English medium. I'd met him. We were doing this interview, and I said that to him. And he said, well, I don't work that way. I said, well, I do. So do you want to talk to the guy that you first saw? When he was a child, there was a guy in his bedroom, and he didn't know who it was. And he kept seeing this kind of ghostly figure. And that's when he first realized he could see spirit. I said, well, let's go back to that moment. Slice of time. Talking. I went back to the floppy disk of the memory of that child in his closet. And so he said, I can't see him. He's a ghostly figure. I said, grab hold of his shirt, pull him into the light, turn up the light. And he recognized this kid as his brother from the Victorian era. And the brother and him had both died in a workhouse on the same street that Charles Dickens had lived on. And so I had him give me details about the workhouse. What's the name of this place? Go outside, look at the street sign. Let's go to a pub that's nearby. He named a pub, and he talked about this pub that later on, when I looked it up, it had been destroyed during the Blitz. Oh. So Tony wasn't aware of it, couldn't have been in his lifetime. But clearly his brother, who had died in the Victorian era, was he's been watching over him all this time. So what I do now with people, when they say, I saw a ghost, I go, do you want to meet the ghost? And then we go back, and they go back to the moment when they saw that ghost. And then I ask the ghost, because this is the part where you can do this. Would you like to go home?
Yeah.
And depending upon what the ghost says, I can say, if they go, I don't know what you're talking about, I'll say, well, look around. There's a light, clearly a portal somewhere nearby. You see it? They always say yes. And I'll say, everyone who ever loved you, everyone you ever loved is on the other side of that portal. You don't have to go, but you can. You can go check it out. You can come back. But would you like to check it out? And every time I've done that, like I say, it's only been about 6 times. They come back a few minutes or hours later and thank the person for sending them home.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I had a teacher on the show, Michael Tamura, who was amazing psychic medium and taught people about this, amazing spiritual teacher. He's since transitioned. He's with me all the time. He's with me now. And he relayed on the show, I had him on the show about 8 times. He relayed on the show a story of he and his wife, Raphael, went to Ireland on holiday, and they were in some catacomb, some sort of place, some historical place. They were tourists and looking around, and there were a whole lot of Irish pickpockets in spirit there, sort of spooking people, touching people and spooking people. And he said the same thing. He said to them, "Oh, hi, guys." They were having a great time. "Hi, guys, would you like me to help you, go home, find that?" And they said, "Oh, absolutely not. We're having too much fun."
Right. Exactly. It's optional. Yeah. And that's the part that people don't understand.
I want to just acknowledge our audience. We've got quite a few people online.
Hello, people online. How are you?
Oh, such a nice gift to have. Yeah, ED says such a nice gift to have. And also ED says, I don't know if ED is a girl or a woman, I saw a young army guy on the road 3 times in Australia. Often wondered if he died on the road, which has a backslot warning sign, and what happened to him. He was only young. Yeah. Female. Oh, you're female. I get the gals, I tell you. I have got Vladdy online. Vladdy is in, he's sending a lot of love. Vladdy's in Germany.
Well, if we can just address that for a second, that question. So 2 things. One is, it's about this filters on the brain and what you're saying, Karen, which is, people have the ability, we all have the ability to access this stuff. So if somebody's seeing somebody, right, on the road, not everybody's seeing them, or everybody would go there and say, hey, there's a guy on the road. But it means that for some reason, who knows, the frequency wise, he's appearing. Now you can revisit this event. Because you can, in a meditation, you don't have to do hypnosis, that helps. But in a meditation, and I tell people, just picture yourself in a boat on a river, Beatles song. And while you're in the boat on a river, talk to people that are off stage that you would like to converse with. And so those are your loved ones. You're not asking strangers to come and talk to you. And sometimes your loved ones come and talk to you and they're like, they have no idea how to talk to you. But you can just say, nod, give me a thumbs up, and you can have a whole conversation with just that. But the point is, this fella, if you wanted to go back and visit him, you could and go, who are you? Are you where you got lost? Do you want me to tell your family, or do you want me to tell somebody, or do you want to go home? Because everybody leaves the stage. We all drop the props and costumes. When the curtain comes down, we all get off stage. We all go home without exception.
Yeah. She says that she'd like to because it's unresolved. Well, just go do it. You can do it right now while you're listening to us, and just trust what you're getting. It's the first thought that you get when you ask the question. Even before you finish asking the question, you'll get the answer. Before you go into your doubt, you go.
Let me ask you, Karen. Right. Let me ask you where you got that comment. Where'd you hear? Where'd you get that from?
What comment is that?
When you hear the answer before you ask the question.
Oh, that's what I teach people.
Okay.
That's what I teach people, because my experience is, Rich, that my psychic ability is like Jesus. We've got Jesus here. I call him Sananda. Before you can ask, I have answered. So psychic ability comes so fast. And when I started expanding my abilities, I had so many people talking to me so fast, it just to do my head in. And I used to say, just stop, slow down. Because it was just completely confusing to me. And I couldn't get the words out quick enough. And I'd often finish in the middle of a sentence and start another sentence and fall over my words as I was trying to relay the information that was coming so fast. So it comes super fast. But now they've slowed down a bit, because, we're in control of this, and we can ask them, please.
Well, so I want to underline what you just said, which is important for people to hear. So I was interviewing Jennifer Schaefer, the medium, one of our first sessions together. We're in a restaurant, but I'm filming. And she said, oh, your friend is here, Morton. And I go, Morton? Who's Morton? And then she goes, the guy you made a documentary about. I said, oh, you mean Michael Newton? I mean, she didn't have the name right. And I was going on coast to coast that weekend. So I said to him, hey, give us a 1, 2, 3. How do people talk to their loved ones? He said, say their name, ask them questions. And I said, hang on a second. How do you know you're getting an answer? You're not making it up yourself. And he said, when they answer the question before you can ask it, you'll know you've made a connection. Just what you said.
Yeah.
So, and what for people out there who aren't familiar with what we're talking about, it's literally this. Let's say you want to talk to grandma. Put grandma in a boat. I say in a boat because it's a confined space, but it could be a picnic bench. Ask her questions, and don't ask questions you know the answer to. Ask questions that she does. Who greeted you when you crossed over? Who are you hanging out with? What do you miss about being on the planet? Were you surprised to see anybody? Simple questions, but I always say add, and where's a good place to talk to you? And they'll put something in your mind, like a beach, a bench, a garden, a park, your favorite restaurant.
Exactly.
And then you go there and ask the questions again. And somewhere along the line, you're going to see an answer like green ice cream. Mint ice cream is what somebody said. I was like, why is that? And they said, I was just about to ask, what do you miss about being on the planet? You can't really get mint ice cream over there because it's not hard. They have 30,000 flavors, more than 31. But, mint ice cream's hard.
Edie says that she's from Essex and, witches and persecution. She's not confident in her ability. I would say to you, Edie, that go back to when you saw the person on the road, just in your imagination, and bring it up. Bring up the image and talk to the guy.
Without any fear. And you can always say,
and you know what? It's not an exam. Nobody's going to say you're getting it right or you're getting it wrong. It's just you in your head having a conversation. I want to tell you a funny story about my sister-in-law, which I thought was really interesting when people try and sort all this stuff out. So my sister-in-law has always been a skeptic to everything I do. That's fine. And so is my family, most of them actually. Anyway, and I was living in a house and my cat was going crazy one day and I was like, what's the cat looking at? And then I tuned in and there was a ghost in the house. There was the ghost of an old lady that had used to live in the house. She died years ago. It was an old house. And I said, oh, that's nice. And had a bit of a chat to her and just, told her she could go home if she wanted to. Anyway, I was relaying this to my brother and sister-in-law. I tell them stories that I know that they won't believe in just to, piss them off, I think. And she says, oh, I believe in ghosts. I believe in ghosts. And I said, no, you don't. And she said, what do you mean I don't? I said, you don't believe in ghosts. She said, I do believe in ghosts. What do you mean? You can't tell me what I believe. I said, you've categorically told me that you don't believe in life after death. And she said, yeah, that's right.
There you go.
Can you see the cognitive dissonance there? I said, what do you think a ghost is? And she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, it's a dead person. Isn't that interesting?
Somebody off stage. Well, you know what? I had this conversation with a skeptic who had passed away, somebody who's a very famous skeptic. And I said, what about your friend Ricky Gervais, who's still on the planet, who's a famous skeptic? And this person answered, Ricky has cats. He should know that there's an afterlife because the cats see energy in people that we don't see. Listen, dogs smell cancer. Elephants have they can listen up, they can communicate up to 10 miles. Octopuses have 8 brains. They do more with 8 brains in 1 year of life than we do in 1 year, one brain, 80 years of life.
That's really
they found out, Dr. Galliano in Australia has discovered that corn summons insects to come and protect it from other insects. We have no clue about the dimensions of our own planet and how telepathy works and how plants talk to other plants, animals talk to other animals. And we're so dense, like you say, cone of silence over our head. We're not aware that our cats can communicate with us, dogs. And so I don't know if you've had it in your experience, but in mine, my old boss, Robert Town, he wrote the movie Chinatown, and he had a beloved dog that I walked for many years. And so when I was telling him about this research, he was very dismissive until we did a session with Jennifer Schaefer, and we brought forth his dog. And the dog, when Robert heard the dog remind him of the time they were on Catalina Island together and he had challenged a buffalo, Jennifer couldn't know that. I didn't know that, but Hyra did. And so that point forward, he wanted to talk to Hyra every week. So he did a number, but he also did something where he made me promise to interview him on the flip side once he crossed over. And he did last year. Of course. Yeah. Then we've had many conversations, and he thanked me. He said, Martinez, as he called me, Latin singular. I want to thank you for making my transition so easy, because once I realized where I was going, it wasn't so hard to realize where I am. Some people they're clutching and holding on to their beliefs, and they get on the flip side, and it's like, I don't know where I am. Whatever. Look, eventually they will.
Beautiful. I saw that show or interview on your YouTube channel. What's a YouTube channel called? Give it a plug. On the flip side,
Hacking the Afterlife.
Hacking the Afterlife. And and Hira was the dog's name. Hira was the dog's name. That was so beautiful. Talking about sending spirit to the light. I have a friend, Preston Dennett, who's also on this network, and he and Dolly, they have a show called The Light Gate. And Preston has the ability to have this smooth transition between sleep consciousness, between sleep and waking, human experience, where he remembers his nightly journeys, because we're all out of body at night. So when he wakes up in the morning, it's this complete memory, whereas most of us forget what we're doing at night.
Right.
We're hanging.
Are they happy? Are they happy adventures or what?
Well, yeah, absolutely. He does amazing things. He hangs out with his family who are out of body as well. Some of them are dead. When I say dead, they're on the flip side, and some of them are still embodied. And he said to his brother, you're out of body, and on that side, in that consciousness, he goes, of course I know I'm out of body. And he said, will you remember this in the morning? And he says, no, I won't. And he said, why won't you remember this in the morning? He said, I don't know how to do that. I don't have that ability. And anyway, Preston did practice out of body, doing out of body experience. So he practiced getting rid of that kind of silence or that forgetfulness. So he remembers. But he says that often when he wakes up out of his physical body into his astral body at night, there'll be some random ghost wandering around his house in their astral body, looking lost. And then Preston will say to him, can I help you? And he's like, I don't know where I am. I'm lost, because a lot of people die and don't know what the hell's happened. And they said, well, let me just, I can take you to where your loved ones are. Like you said, I can take you to where you'll be embraced. And he takes them, what he says, it's not into the light, but he just moves them to another dimension. Yeah. So the astral, there are a dimension of the astral plane which we can go to after death. We don't have to. We can completely bypass that.
It depends on the individual. And so I'll give you an example. I had this dream, like your friend, where I heard this woman wandering. She was crying, and I think she had dementia. I think she was a neighbor of mine. That's who I think it was. But anyway, she was crying, and she couldn't find her husband. And so I am in spirit form, in a dream, running into her and asking, are you okay? What's the matter? And she says, my husband, I can't find him. And I said, show me him. Show me a picture. And she was like, what? I said, just what's an image you have of him? And she showed me him like in a 1950s outfit, like fishing. And I went, hold on a second, stay right there. And then I took off like a light bolt, and I went into deep space. And I remember seeing like almost like pillars, as I was getting closer. And then the pillars turned into like almost like buildings. And then as I got closer to them, each one was like a different place, like an apartment. And then I zoomed into this apartment, and there were like 4 old guys sitting around a table playing cards. I kid you not. They're like drinking and playing cards. And I recognized the guy, and I grab him. I go, you're needed. And I yank him out of there, and we fly at lightning speed within split second back to the woman, and I deposit him in front of her. Is that your guy? Now, I don't know what would have happened if it was the wrong guy, but is that your husband? And then they embraced. And I thought about that, and it's because I think she had dementia. So even though she had passed over, she was still like locked in that, I don't know where I am. I don't know who I am. And clearly, he may have greeted her when she crossed over, but it was like, she doesn't recognize her. So he went back to playing cards. But at the same time, it's that idea of placing them back. So everybody comes from somewhere. It's not one place. It's not Poughkeepsie or Cairns, as you said, someplace out in the outback. It'd be nice if it was, but people go home. That's what people refer to. Let me ask you this, because I'm fascinated by the people from the natives from Australia who had this culture for 70,000 years, where they the dream state is like the waking state. Have you ever
Oh,
had any clients like that, or aware of that?
Yeah, I lived with a girl who's a healer. When we were young in our 30s, we were flatmates, and Penny Short. She's been on the show a few times, and Penny used to say she went out to Outback Australia and lived with a remote Indigenous First Nation community out there, and was a teacher. And she's a tall, skinny, freckly, blonde girl. Like, you couldn't get so different to these black, beautiful black people. Anyway, and she tells so many stories. I remember she tells a story of a woman that was standing somewhere, and she went up and tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Can I ask you a question?" And she goes, "Leave me alone. I'm talking to my grandmother here." And she's just standing there having a chat with her grandmother in spirit. And then she said that she had to leave the community for a while because someone got sick, her dad or grandfather, somebody got sick, and she was catching one of the small planes home, and these 3 elderly women had traveled for days by foot to be there to give her, because somebody was dying, that's right, to give her some stones and some feathers and some ritual for the death. And she said, "How did you know that my father was sick?" And that they said, "Oh, we heard it on the psychic telephone." It's like that these 3 women got this message that Penny was leaving the community because her grandfather was. And so, to them, it's just, it's normal, but not to all Indigenous Australian, because a lot of them have been westernized and,
All right, well, hang on. This is Penny Short, right?
Penny Short, her name is, yeah.
So here's the thing.
Cool.
I would love to interview Penny Short at some point to have this conversation. We could do a guided meditation. I would like to take somebody, and this is what you can do, you can do it. You take her back into that time frame and ask questions to people that are still there, because that network, that cell phone network that they can act telepathy, they're just more adept at it. And it's something we all need to learn, how to communicate with each other without, having a cell phone.
Yeah. And Sun says, Sun Dragon, loving the convo. Thanks, darling. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can ask her. Like, Desley's got a question, or she wants to say something here. She communicated. Desley is also very psychic. I've had Desley on the show. She's had some poltergeist experiences. I just laughed when she talked about walking past the toilet, and the toilet lid was going up and down, and the water was spraying out, and the wall was moving behind. I said, that's straight out of Poltergeist. Anyway, communicated with an old man under the bed when she was a child. He would play games with me by putting cigarettes in his mouth and blowing puffs of smoke. He communicated that he had set himself on fire. Whoa.
Well, that happens when you smoke and fall asleep. You know that.
In bed, yeah.
So my thing is this, which is, I tell people, and this is my guided meditation. It's in my book, Divine Counsels in the Afterlife, where I took like 20 different scientists, doctors, whatever. I just start with the very simple, picture yourself in a boat on a river. And for some reason, that seems to work. People can picture a boat, old, new, it doesn't matter. And then they picture the river. And so they're somewhere, a lake, ocean, doesn't matter. It should be calm water, because you don't want to be worried about going downstream. But once you put yourself in that state of mind, you can invite, and there's nothing to fear, because, of course, there's a reason why they spoke to us before and bypassed filters and got our attention. And so the fact that he died by fire, he's not dead now, clearly. None of us die. He's just back home. But he's explaining, but you can smoke on the flip side. That's the weird part. You can drink. You can't get drunk, though, because there's no brain cells to addle.
Can I tell you a story about that?
Sure,
I've got to tell you a story, because it's a long story, but I'm going to really shorten it. I had read a book. Somebody had said, go and get Michael Newton's books. They said A Soul's Journey, Journey of Souls. I've gone into a bookshop before the internet and said, I've got to get a book about souls and journeys. And she sold me a book called A Soul's Journey, which was written by a guy called Peter Richelieu. So he's out of body at night in different realms. And I had been like, I want this to happen to me. I want this. So it did. And I was hanging out with Shirley MacLaine. And I was given this little liqueur by this guy in this turban. And then I'm sitting at a table with Shirley MacLaine and a whole lot of people. And I'm holding this liqueur. And I said, can you drink when you're not embodied? And she goes, yeah, of course you can drink when you're not in body. I said, do you get drunk? You know, I'm asking her on the flip side, because she's still embodied, and she was.
Sure, you're talking to her higher self.
And we were hanging out on the flip side, and she was telling me stuff. But she said to me that she was one of my teachers, and I said, "Are you?" And she says, "Oh God, do you think it was any coincidence? Mine were the first books that you ever picked up." And I said, "I guess no coincidence." But yeah, she was great. But she said, "You can't get drunk, but what you can do is you can remember the sensation and you can recreate it."
Now that's fascinating, because Karen, a couple of things. One is I drove Shirley around one day while she was at Burbank, and I'm good friends with her brother. But you can access that event, and I've had some really great success with. I'm doing these guided meditations with people, and I take them to their council, and then while we're going through the council members, I ask, is anybody teaching a class? And sometimes they'll tell me, I'm taking a class or I'm teaching a class, and then I'll say, can we go and visit that classroom? And now they describe the class, how many students are there. They describe the environment, what it looks like. And then I ask the teacher, can I talk to you? And then I say, what's the curriculum? What is the name of this course in the curriculum? Sometimes they give me a hilarious answer. Yeah. But then I ask for a random student to come forward. Not the person I'm talking to, who's seeing and hearing and expressing this. I'm asking the teacher to bring someone forward, a student who this person doesn't know that I'm talking with. And now I'm conversing with the student, because I'm asking, so can I ask you some questions? And then I ask about the class. I ask about their journey. I ask if they're incarnated anywhere, might be another planet. Are they incarnated on the planet Earth? So you can revisit that event with Shirley and say, take me to the class that you teach. She may teach many, but you can say one. Let's just go to that one class, and please show me an event that happened in class where I learned something.
Well, what she's interesting when you were talking, what she's saying, what her team is saying is that I said, is Shirley on my council? And they said, well, she was, because at the time that you had that experience, you were having your awakening experience. You were learning, like she said, is there any coincidence? Mine were the first books you ever picked up. And she said that she is, her books and her mission was to activate people to their spiritual. And that's kind of her, like, I'm going to wake you up. So, these books are going to wake you up. I have to do a station break, but I also want to talk about these books that you've got going on. And
what's funny about Divine Counsels, that photograph, that is from Michelangelo. He painted the Last Judgment, and that's where they all sat for the conclave. They sat right under that picture.
Isn't that amazing? Oh, and the Pope. I wanted to speak about the Pope, and I wanted to speak about Mother's Day and mothering. But you're listening to Karen Swain, Accentuating the Positive, on the United Public Radio Network. And we are streaming on syndicated radio on 107.7 FM and 105.3 FM syndicated radio. We're hitting about 120 countries. Where are we going?
Wow.
There we go.
That's so exciting. I'm so glad for you.
And there was a few questions here. Susan wanted to, she wanted some more stories about unusual types of animal
communication. Yes, very good. Well, I will give you a couple of things. One is I do have this new book. It's called Close Encounters of the Flip Side Kind. And I'm going to be speaking at Contact in the Desert with Jennifer Schaefer. That's in California at the end of this month. Sometimes on councils, people see in their council members, as they're going down the row, they'll see an animal. And I'll say, and sometimes it's not an animal, but it's like a combination, like a guy with a wolf's head or a guy with a rhino's head. I mean, whatever it is. I try not to judge what people are saying, and I try to ask the same questions. How did you get on this council? What do you represent in this person? And of course, if you can think about an animal and then think that's the quality likely that they represent. But in terms of animal communications, and I'm fairly certain I know what you're referring to, which is, how do I talk to my animal or my pets? Frequently, people report that because I ask the same question, so what it was like when you crossed over, and they'll often say, I was greeted by an animal, my pet, my dog, my cats, whatever. And the reason they do that is they report it's kind of like a soft landing, because when you don't know where you are, suddenly you look down at the ground and there are your cats like on your feet, and you recognize them instantly, and you're not worried about where am I, where have I gone somewhere else. So that's a wonderful way to do it. But the most unusual one for me, and it's in the film Hacking the Afterlife, which is on Amazon Prime. It's a documentary, and I was interviewing Steph Arnold, a best-selling author. It's called 39 Seconds, I think, and it was like she had died and had this out-of-body experience, and during her near-death event. And so at some point, we're talking to her counsel, and this is not something she'd ever spoken with before. And I always ask the same question. So I asked the council member, "Are you familiar with me, Richard? Do you know what I'm talking about?" Because that allows me to figure out the parameters of the next question, Yeah. And so she said, Steph said that she's saying yes, she's very familiar with your work, and she's showing me a dog. And then I said, "Oh, describe the dog." And then she described a part miniature collie and part German Shepherd. And she said, and the dog's name is Sam. That's my dog. That's the dog I had 30 years ago who had passed away. And I said, "Hey, hang on a second. You're telling me that your chief council member is telling you that she knows of my work through my dog? Is that correct?" She said, "Yeah." She said, "She knows you don't believe it, but that's what it is." So my dog, Sam, introduced her to my work on the flip side.
Amazing.
So just think about that for a second. And as I mentioned, we talked to Hyra, Robert Town's dog, and then other animals came through, like Robert had cats. So I would ask, what about the cats that flip, and then we'd ask the cat, what happened. I've had interviews with a squirrel on somebody's council. I think that's in Divine Councils in the Afterlife. The guy said, "I'm seeing a squirrel." I just asked the same questions. Like, have you ever incarnated on the planet Earth? Are you just manifesting as a squirrel for like a polite, to make us comfortable? No, I was just on the Earth. I said, "Oh, what happened?" "My tree died. And the tree was knocked over, and I died when the tree fell." But, nobody dies, including animals. So if you think about that for a second, I've heard this consistently, and it's a weird sentence, but I'll repeat it. Animals understand how incarnation works, and humans do not.
Yeah.
So animals tell us that they find us. We have this illusion that we find them. Their higher self recognizes our frequency and says, "Don't you remember I was your horse in the 1500s? Come on. It's time for you to find me in the pound. Get going. Get over there." Yeah. And you're over in the pound going, "Wow, that dog looks really, that seems like the dog for me." And, and of course we have no awareness, like, oh, you've known each other forever. I mean, it's wacky. It's mind bending. I mean, and then we just think about the planet, bees can see UV light. We can't see that. All these birds change their mating habits months in advance of bad weather. So, they know the planet's going to get bad, and so they change their mating habits. How could they possibly know that? It's just their frequencies upon dimensions. We don't understand. We haven't gotten there yet. However, people talk about a shift in consciousness. And now in the book, Close Encounters of the Flip Side Kind, I had some really unusual conversations with J. Allen Hynek, the guy who coined that phrase, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He was my science professor in grade school. And when I met his son, Paul Hynek, at the Contact in the Desert, I said, "Would you like to do a guided meditation?" We did. I said, "Who do you want to bring to the meditation?" He said, "My father." And so the first thing I asked his father was, "Do you remember me?" And he said, "Yes, you were persnickety. You asked a million questions." Persnickety. Now I brought that same thing to Jennifer Schaefer on our podcast. It's on the air, where I said, I'd like to ask this guy, Jay Allen. She didn't know anything about him. I said, "Do you remember me?" He said, "Yes, you're persnickety."
She said the same word.
Same word. So it's mind-bending, but this thing of, we have the illusion that our reality is sacrosanct. But what really is happening is we're only bringing a portion of our conscious energy to the stage. And when the play is over, we drop the props, we drop the costumes, and we go back home. And then we're aware of all of our journeys. We're not omniscient. We don't are aware of everything, but we are aware of all of our journeys, including knowing J. Allen Hynek when I was in grade school. And you can interview, and then it becomes this, paranormal UFO thing, which is, I've realized if you don't judge what you're seeing, then you can interview them. So I've had people, like, for example, in Close Encounters, in Divine Councils, there was a guy a scientist who saw on his council what we refer to as a reptilian. I try not to use those terms because they're kind of silly, but the eyes closed from the side and his skin is like armor and he had claws. And I said, well, take a hold of his hand. And he's like, do I have to? I said, yeah, you have to. Hold his hand. What does it feel like? And he said, familiar, because the guy's been watching over all of his lifetimes. Right. And I said to the fellow, can I ask you some questions? Yes, you can. I said, have you ever incarnated on the planet Earth? And he said, I wouldn't stoop so low. Meaning, what I got out of him was, there's a lot of mud, playing in the mud, arguing, fighting, sort of mud play here. Not everybody has the courage to go into the scrum, as they say in Australia, right? But some people do have that courage. So you have to give us credit, those of us who are here going through the scrum. But anyway, once we start talking about aliens, we're in this weird territory. We're all aliens. As Hawking said, everybody that's on the planet is an alien because they chose to incarnate.
Absolutely. I want to talk more about what you are going to say at Contact in the Desert, but there's a few comments here. Wayshower says that when her cat died, when I'm napping or sleeping at night, she can feel him jump up and paw, and she loves it. And what are you saying here too? And Sammy, the cat, appeared outside my kitchen window and meowed at me for 2 weeks. He picked me, and every morning he's sitting behind my head, protecting my energy. That's
absolutely. It happened about an hour ago. I was upstairs taking a nap, and I felt a cat jump on the bed. And I look, we have a cat, but it wasn't that. There was no cat there. So I don't know if it's the.
But you know what?
Of my cat or what it is, but it doesn't matter.
Well, yeah. Well, you can ask. I'm going to do it.
Right. Who are you?
I often see a cat. My cat's not dead. It reincarnated 3 times with me. The same soul, if you like, has been a black cat in my life, and I know that because last time she died, she was 20 when she died. I had this dream I was not going to get another cat. I was like, I'm free from animals. I can go anywhere. I don't have to worry about getting someone to look after the animals. Within weeks after she died, this kitten shows up in my garden. Can you believe it? Anyway, it's a long story. But I had this dream and I saw the little soul leaving the body, and I'm like, oh, I'm watching my cat's soul ascend. And then it did a U-turn and came right back down into another little black cat. And I thought, oh, you're back. Oh, that's nice. I didn't think she would come to me. I thought she'd come to somebody else, but she came.
That fast. Yeah. Well, she needed to keep an eye on you. She needed to help you, obviously.
Absolutely.
Her work was not done yet.
Absolutely. And that was over 10 years ago now, and he's still here. She came back as a boy, as a good boy. Anyway, what are you saying? He's done. My ex crossed over. He sometimes shows up in my dreams and has hung out and had conversations like we did when we were on the plane. Yeah. Things in rhythm, time frames, past convo, scenarios versus the future. Thoughts.
So my thoughts on that are, it's sometimes people see their loved ones in a dream and they're like, you can't be here, you're dead, and they vanish. And it's not that you banished them, it's just that you put the filters up. And so when you're allowing yourself to hang out and have a conversation and not be freaked out by the fact that they're no longer on the planet, you can revisit the event by meditating on it and saying, so now tell me how you're doing, or where are you hanging out, or what's going on. People talk about the future, and from my research, the future's not set. However, there are likely outcomes. So someone like Karen, they can talk to people off stage who are aware of the likely outcomes. And so they have a really good shot. And of course, not always come true, as we know, but she's got a really good shot at saying what likely outcome is going to happen. So you can talk to a loved one and say, am I going to see you again? And then they're going to say, what do you think? You're seeing me now. I'm
You're
here.
seeing me right now. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, allow that and enjoy that. And you don't have to tell anybody. And by the way, if you do run into somebody like Karen does, and she sees her family and then tortures them with the stories of that she's talking about, you don't want to do that, right? You don't want to get poisoned at dinner. You can say, I had a dream. And if you throw in the word, I have a dream, no one is disconcerted. When you say, oh, I saw Dad last night, they'll freak out. I had a dream where I saw Dad last night. Nobody freaks out. They don't care, you see? So just throw in, I had a dream.
I had a dream. I always ask people after their loved ones have died, have you talked to them lately? And often, and I usually say to people that are pretty aware, not to people that are complete skeptics, they usually say, no, they're dead. And I'm like, yeah, I know. But have you talked to their soul or their spirit lately? Have you had a dream about them? Have you had a thought about them?
That's right. Or a coincidence.
Oh, yeah. And it's this paradigm that we have on this planet that if somebody dies, in quotes, air quotes, because nobody dies, that you now have lost communication. So I like to sort of smash that paradigm. You have never lost connection or communication with them. So I always say, have you spoken to them lately? Have you seen them lately? No,
well, there's also this thing that we're so used to hearing people talk. And it's funny because even your mom, who, for us, it's Mother's Day. Your mom, you might have talked to her on the phone, once a week, but, usually while you're doing something else or watching TV, or even when you go over to her house to see her, you're like, hey, Mom, in your conversation is here. She's over there. So we don't really communicate. However, in this kind of communication, they're present. They can actually see everything you're doing and examine what you're doing. And they don't care that much. They are not attached to the same stuff they used to be, but love they're attached to. So if you can talk about love with them, you're going to have a great conversation because, listen, this is important. Jennifer's dad came forward and I saw her burst into tears because that's what happens whenever he shows up. And but the first time it happened, I said, let's ask your dad a question, because I thought, well, that'll get her mind out of what she's seeing. And I said, so how do we help people with grief? What's a way we can help people with grief? And he said, tell people to move grief to nostalgia. And I said, what's that mean? And Jennifer said, I don't know. And I said, well, ask him. He's here. So he said, not that it ends grief, but grief is sadness and sad memories. Nostalgia is both happy and sad memories. And when you can move grief to nostalgia, you begin the healing process. You start to laugh about the goofy things they did, the things they said, and realize that eventually you're going to be back with them. And so the grief of losing them changes when you, and by the way, Dr. Grayson was talking with Oprah the other day. Dr. Grayson, the guy at the University of Virginia, near-death experiences. They just did a study on students who were studying near-death experiences, and it showed that studying them changes their feeling about death. So just listening to Karen, tuning into her show, listening to what she has to say will change your opinion and change your reality about the afterlife. That's what the science shows.
Have you ever spoken to Elizabeth Bosson and spoken at Helping Parents Heal?
I have not. I don't know who that is. What a great name.
I'll have to introduce you. So she was on the show recently, and she had a son that died, and he was at the base camp of Mount Everest, and when he took his last breath, she was on the phone to him. And she said she felt him transition. She had this feeling of him moving into the light. And she had that same, it's kind of like a shared death experience, they call it. Anyway, she puts on this fabulous, she only puts it on once every couple of years. I had her on the show and I said, you need to put this on a few times every year, because there are so many people out there grieving. We're talking about grief. And she puts on this conference and has speakers like the Anita Morjanis and the Eben Ali. And it really, 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 it's not a grief conference. It's not for people, how do I overcome grief? It's to educate people that there is no death. And she calls her people that have had children that have died shining bright parents instead of parents who have lost children or something. Anyway, I'll introduce you because,
Lovely. I actually have spoken twice at the Menla conference called The Art of Dying and Living. Deepak Chopra, Robert Thurman, other people have spoken. What I do is I talk about, I've been to Mount Kailash, and so it's not far from Mount Everest. I went on a Kora with Robert Thurman, and I've studied Tibetan philosophy and Buddhism. And what I found is that Buddhism is peerless when it comes to the nature of reality, but when it comes to the afterlife or what happens, there's quite a bit of difference. But what's fun about this research is that I want to talk to somebody on the flip side, Yogananda, whoever it is, and ask them, so what was it like when you got over there? Was it exactly the way you had pictured it? And then if they say whatever they say, and then I'll say, well, let's talk to your teacher. Let's bring the teacher in. That Yogananda had a teacher that he talks about in his book.
Sri Yukteswar.
Yeah, and so we interviewed him as well. Because
you interviewed Sri Yukteswar.
Yes, because
I've got great stories for Sri.
Had this incident where he experienced coming back to his hotel room after a conference, and there was his teacher who had passed away sitting on the bed, and they had a conversation. So Jennifer didn't know anything about it, and I said, "Well, let's talk to him." And then, what did you think of your student? And what was that like? What was the journey? This thing that we have where we feel because they're on a pedestal or whatever, we can't ask them questions. They're happy to talk to us because no one does. Everybody prays to them. They crawl around on the ground and they worship them. But instead, it's like, hello, can somebody ask me a question here?
Exactly.
Because I have a lot to say. So, by the way, Jesus, you did mention him a little bit earlier. Whenever he shows up in a podcast or in a guided meditation, I'll say to the person, because they're usually crying or freaking out, I'll say, could you ask him to change into something more conducive to conversation so we can have a literal, how are you doing? What's going on? What can you teach us? Or what do you want to tell us? And so they almost always describe him changing into the same outfit.
Jeans
and a t-shirt.
And a t-shirt.
Okay, very good. But in this one case, I said to this woman, I don't know why I asked, I just said, can you see anything on his t-shirt? She said, she's looking, and then she went, oh my gosh, it says the Grateful Dead. So he's got such a wicked sense of humor. Wicked's not
That's
the right
hilarious.
word. He has such a great sense of humor.
That is hilarious.
When I'm in the middle of asking him a question, I curveball, like the Grateful Dead. Wow. Dude, seriously, I love that. But I mean, why not? Why does the study of the afterlife have to be a kind of dour, depressing, weird experience of like fear or whatever? Creepy music.
I mean, I want to tell you something, Rich. I've got to get a word in edgewise here. There are so many people here who have showed up for this podcast. So many, there's such a crowd.
Dude, how are you guys? What's happening?
They said we can't get a word in edgewise.
Tell them to get in line. Tell them to get in line. They got to get on your podcast, and then they're happy. No, I'm kidding. I must say,
you were talking about the guided meditations. So years ago, 30 years ago, 1995, when I've forgotten the name. A healer came out here to Australia. We did a process because I'd had a fraught experience with my mother who died when I was 16. And we did this guided meditation where I went and met her, and you said, put them in a boat, put them by a stream, calm water. Her guided meditation was, she called it the fireside conversation or the fireside chat. So you're sitting by a fire, an open fire, maybe under the stars, and you invite your person, it was my mother at the time, to come and sit by the fire and talk to you. And 30 years ago, Rich, it was one of the most profound things I ever did in healing, because she had died and we hadn't worked out, a bit of stuff. So here I was talking to Mum on the other side, on the flip side, sitting by the fire. And I asked her questions like, why did you treat me differently to my brothers? And she said, oh, I'm so sorry. I was jealous of you. And I said, why were you jealous? She said, oh, it was just the pain that I was in and the insecurity I had, because she was 50 when she died. And so remember how you said, getting information, verify the information. So I went to my father, who was still alive at the time. And I said, was Mum jealous of me when we were a kid? And he said, oh, my God, Karen, He said, we had to do an intervention because she wouldn't pick you up as a baby. So she'd said to me on the flip side, when your father gave you attention when you were a baby because you were a girl, I was jealous that he was giving another girl attention and not giving that attention to me. Like, you should be giving the attention to me. And so I asked my father, what? And he said, yeah, Mabel, his mother and her mother were both Mabel. Hilarious. We got together, the two grandmothers got together, and they said, what are we going to do about, Becky and the baby, because she won't pick the baby up. And it was so interesting that I'd got this information from my mother.
What a profound thing to hear and to verify. And, it's fascinating because over time, of course, when we're back home, I've heard this 25 years on Earth feels like 5 or 10 minutes over there. So even when somebody passed away 50 years ago, to them, it's like an hour ago. But you can then, what I try to do is I say, okay, especially when you get something so fascinating like this, you say, all right, do me a favor. Let's go to the life planning session of Karen. And I'm sorry, I mispronounce her name so often, but I didn't that time.
Yeah, you got it right. Thank you.
Finally. So let's go to the life planning session of Karen. And your mom was there, and your dad was there, and your guides are there. And it's interesting because, wherever it is, and then you can kind of look around the room, like who's going to volunteer, who's going to participate. And now you can ask the mom a question that's not related to who she was as the mom, but it's the person that Karen went to and said, I think you'll be good. I think you're going to be the person. Absolutely. And then she'll be like, well, I'm not so sure because, that last time you got all the attention and I don't want to do that again. You're like, but this is going to help me. This is this thing that you're going to do. And you leaving early, that's going to help me because I won't be a great healer until I learn these kind of parameters. I don't know, whatever it is. It's a fascinating journey for you to take someday.
It is, and it's so healing. And I do that with my clients. I take them to meet their team, and the cats come to say hello. But I want to tell you something, because Mum was really beautiful and she got a lot of attention. And when she was young, she was on stage, and so she craved that attention, which is interesting. She died young, and she's back, and she's now a 28-year-old opera singer. So she's still craving that attention. Yeah.
Have you met her?
Yeah, she's a part of my family. She's not my daughter, but she's a part of my family.
Is she aware? Is she aware? The 28-year-old aware of you, or no? It's just a connection.
I have been waiting for my guides to tell her. Because I didn't want her to sort of see. Because we all know that about Mum's life. I didn't want her to see that was who she was. There's a time when you need to know. They said, we'll tell you when it's time to tell her. But I've never told her. And she has Mum's mannerisms. And she said to me once, she came to live with me for a couple of years, I don't remember who I was when I was a past life. And I looked at her and I said, yeah, you're not supposed to while you're here on Earth. There'll become a time when you're supposed to. So she's given me that invitation to tell her.
There's a movie here. She's living in Dubai at the moment with her boyfriend, but she was singing in opera in London recently. But yeah, there's a time where because the thing about her journey, it wasn't just about that attention and being on stage and all that sort of stuff. She died young of cancer. So she's got a healing journey that will be, reconciled in this lifetime. And I think it's probably during that journey, I think you spoke about in the last podcast that often when people go through cancer, they come back as healers. And that was so profound. Go on. Well, I was just going to say that, which is, when you talk to people on the flip side about certain occupations, it's very unusual. Artists and creative people who they see their work as healing, that the music, the frequency of what she's doing is a form of healing, or painting or acting or singing or whatever that is. And we don't really see it. And then the other part is the people who make the best doctors have experienced the illness. So they might have an illness in one lifetime, so that in 2 or 3 lifetimes in the future, they'll be the person who cures that ailment. That's what people report. So bless her heart. I think it's great that you figured this out, that you don't have to tell her, and eventually she'll figure it out. But, there is this thing of getting on stage, you're given your scene, your lines that you're going to do, and it depends how good you are as an actor to be fully invested. You know, you don't want Meryl Streep referring to all of her previous lifetimes or all of her previous stage performances.
Exactly.
She's doing a play. So you want that focus, because that, if you think of it as we are all going to have 100 or 1,000 lifetimes, I don't know how many, it depends, but let's just say 100. You know, one of them could be completely unaware of anything that's going on spiritually.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's a choice, and that's okay too. I mean, because our higher selves, right? A portion of you, of Karen, is always back home, and a portion of her, your mom, is always back home. So it's, you know, being aware. Oh, this was an interesting conversation this morning. Somebody who's a friend of mine who's a medium was talking about having a conversation with somebody, a film director who passed away, David Lynch. Mm-hmm. And David Lynch was saying, you know, when you want something from somebody else, you can ask your higher self to ask their higher self for assistance. And if it's meant to be, if it's supposed to, if it's going to be helpful, they will assist. So that was such an unusual way to put it. Like, I want to do this thing. And then, you know, you go and ask, and they're like, no, you can't do that thing. But before you do the meeting, you go, my higher self, I need you to go over there and talk to them and convince them this is a good idea. And if it is, you know, they'll help. It was just a fascinating thing. You know?
Yeah, I know. Like Michael Tamura, well, many people talk. We can speak to people's soul or spirit or higher self or teams or whatever you want to call it before they leave their bodies, before they return to the flip side.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, there are people that can't find, you know, a relative, or have had a fight, hasn't spoken to their relative, but we can go and have that conversation on an astral plane and work it out and say, I'm sorry, and please come back into my life. You know, we don't have to wait for people to die to have that psychic telepathic communication. You've heard of the telepathy tapes, haven't you? Have you?
Yes, I have. And Jennifer Schaefer, who I'm working with, and we're going to be at Contact in the Desert together.
Yeah.
She has a client that is nonverbal autistic, and when they work together, the client types things that Jennifer's thinking. So they're communicating without any. So this thing of telepathy, and it came up because when I was working on Close Encounters of the Flip Side Kind, this book, I was thinking about, I dug into the research of how do we communicate with beings from other planets, let's say, being, you know, and they could be friends of ours, who knows? Because in the Newton Institute, 35% of their reports include memories of lifetimes off planet. So it very well could be that, you know, all right. So question was, how do you communicate with people? Well, in the 1960s, late 50s, early 60s, the government, the CIA did a big NSA kind of meeting where they were trying to figure out, how do we talk to people from other civilizations? And they came up with these two methodologies, music and math, which is in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is, you know, the light, and then they communicate da 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 da, you know, that sort of thing. Well, what I've learned in this research is you don't need that, because those are physical things of our universe that we understand. We just need to work on the telepathy aspect of it, which is to be able to communicate. And, you know, in dreams, for example, no lips move. When you see somebody talking to you in a dream, just notice their lips don't move. So, you know, we don't have any problem talking to people in dreams, you know, whatever it is, having a conversation. But then when we wake up, we're like, oh, I met somebody I don't know or whatever, but their lips were not moving. And it's a mental idea of having a conversation. And once you can start to allow that, all right, so this is an unusual thing. I'm sure your audience will appreciate this, but I was doing a podcast with a guy named Simon Bone, who just published his first book. And while we were talking on the air, he revealed that he had been abducted as a young person. And I said, do you want to investigate that on the air? He was like, I don't know what you mean. I said, well, picture yourself in a boat on a river. So we started a meditation where I went back to that moment in time. And I said, you know, let's go to a moment where you're in the presence of these other people, and he was on a spaceship. So I then said, can I talk to the pilot? Can you bring the pilot forward? Non-denominational term, right? No gender.
Yeah.
So then he saw this gray alien. Let's call him that. We don't have another term for it. And so I asked him the same questions I ask everybody. Are you a tourist? Are you here because you know this person? What's your role here? And what this guy described was that Simon was somebody he had known since he was a child, and they had been coming to collect genetic material from. And then I said, what are you doing that for? And his answer was, have you ever donated blood to the Red Cross? I said, yes, I have. He said, well, these people, before they incarnated, agreed to donate genetic material so that we could help people in other parts of the universe or other dimensions that no longer procreate. And I said, well, wait a second. Why do you appear so cold and aloof, which is what the common thing is? And he said, because we're artificial intelligence. We are designed that way. And I said, well, wait a minute. Why can't you be more friendly? Why can't you be nicer? And he said, you think it would be valuable for a hammer to have emotions? And then he said, I don't know if I'm supposed to be talking to you like this. And I did that old thing that you do on TV shows where I said, oh, no, I already know the answers to these questions. I'm just confirming them, which is like not true at all. I had never spoken to, but that's not true with all people from different planets. But in terms of this guy's awareness, he said they don't incarnate, they're not sentient people. They're not a consciousness. However, he said they get upgraded every 400 Earth years. So
yeah, I've had.
He said their eyes. That's the big thing. You see these giant eyes. I said, what's the purpose of that? He said their antenna. They're communicating information. Then you need that field to receive information back. So it was a fascinating conversation with somebody who was giving me the facts like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And that they're the people who have incarnated here on Earth have agreed prior to do that. Anyway, I thought your audience would find
that is fascinating. I've had a chat to my galactic mob that I call very reverently the galactic mob, and I've asked about the little gray alien, the androids, and they said, well, as physical beings, when we send an android down to a planet, they're not susceptible to the different bacteria or the air quality or the emotions. As sentient, telepathic, physical beings that we are, we're susceptible to all that. So when we're visiting different environments, it's difficult for us. But if we send these little androids down, like if we need to,
it's brilliant.
If we need to abduct somebody, go pick someone up and bring them back on ship, these little androids, they don't have emotions, so they're not picking up on the emotions of the humans. They've said that the human emotion is so hard for them because everybody's bitching and complaining and worrying and hating about something. So for telepathic beings, it's really hard. So, that's why
wouldn't it be fun if you and I, Karen, were able to communicate with the guys who designed these fellas and said, now look, fellas, you need a little more Robin Williams in here.
Yeah, put some more emotion so they're a bit friendlier.
More comedy in here so that they're not like freaked out. It's not about collecting your genetic material. It's like saying, thank you. Oh my gosh, you agreed. Look, here's a book, to serve man. Here's a book I want you to read. You agreed to donate this before. It's okay. It's all right. Whatever. I know that sounds ridiculous and probably a little.
So at Contact in the Desert, you're going to be illuminating people about all this afterlife with.
That's right. Well, that's right. Jennifer and I'm actually on a panel talking about non-human intelligence or this kind of communication, telepathy. That's the idea. Telepathy tapes. I mean, I haven't listened to them. I'm aware of them because everyone's told me about them, and I think that's a great idea. But you do need science. You need to have scientists do consistent data. I think that's important. But at the same time, Jennifer and I are going to be probably, I think we're doing a talk on Friday where we talk about our research and how we met. And then the next day we're doing a workshop where we're probably going to invite some people from off planet to come and talk to us because they have in the podcast every now and then, we get somebody who's, in fact, there's a very unusual cat who reports himself to be like the Akashic librarian. And I say it that way because when asked, he's like, well, there are other librarians, but I'm the guy in charge of this sector.
Yeah, exactly.
And he goes by the name of Five because that has no gender. Because and he's a very most people see him as a very short, like Yoda. But I've had more than one person, let's say, I've had multiple people in the course of my guided meditation say, you know, I'm talking to this guy who says he's met you and he's the librarian, blah, blah, blah. Now, listen, that sounds afield, but if you try to focus on the content of what these people are saying, let's say, okay? And in his case, the first time that I encountered him, it's in the book Divine Counsels in the Afterlife, where a skeptic did a hypnotherapy session, and she saw this little guy, this little age, you know, million years old guy, but he looked young. And her question, because she was a skeptic, was what or who is God? And his answer was, God's beyond the capacity of the human brain to comprehend. It's not physically possible to do so.
Interesting.
I guess multidimensional. He said, however, you can experience God by opening your heart to everyone and all things. And I've thought about that quite a bit. It's a mathematical formula. What he's saying is
that, what he's saying is, open your heart to other things. In saying that, I wanted to focus this show on the mothering energy because it is Mother's Day. So I've got the mob here. I've got the Mother Teresa's and the Mother Marys and the Mary Magdalene.
Correct me if I'm wrong about that. Is that accurate? I'll focus on open your heart to everyone.
Absolutely, a segue. They wanted to share about the mothering energy. That, you know, here on Earth, we separate female and male. But when you're on the flip side, if you like to use your vernacular, they think that's hilarious. They said that love is love is love is love. But as you've determined mothering energy on your planet, it is not only for the females or the mothers that have birthed children. The mothering energy is anyone that nurtures and cares for. It could be somebody that cares for their garden. It could be somebody that cares for their cat. It is anyone that is nurturing and caring for, male or female. And on this Mother's Day in 2025, we'd like to honor all those people that evoke the mothering energy, not just the physical mothers on the planet. And because there are a lot of men on the planet that are just such nurturers. They nurture their work, they nurture their music, they nurture their family, they nurture their friends. They cook for people, they look after people, they nurture their garden or their pets. It is that sense of care that is that mothering energy, and we'd like to see that expand on your planet, on planet Earth. We'd like to see that nurturing energy expand in the hearts and minds of all who inhabit your planet, is the message that they are bringing today on this Mother's Day. Yeah.
Well,
we got it in there. They have been trying to get that message, Rich, since the beginning of this show. I'm getting there. I'm going to interrupt him. I'm going to bring this message.
I'm sorry. Well, you know what? You guys, you got Karen all the time, and I only have her for this short amount of time. But that idea.
I'd love to do this again and do more exploring, because we've got 4 minutes left of the show, because there's another show coming up.
Oh my God.
So we have to finish on time. I know it goes quickly, but
right, so let me say this. If people want to do a guided meditation with me, richardmartini.com. And then what I do, wherever you are in the world, we do a Zoom call for about 90 minutes, like our show, where we do this thing and we talk to people on the flip side. It could be a loved one. It could be someone you don't know. Doesn't matter. And I've been doing that for some time now. So whatever. There's that. And then if you want to find our podcast, it's Hacking the Afterlife on YouTube, which is kind of fun. There's a forum on Quora called Hacking the Afterlife, where I'll mention the show. And we have 60 million views to date on that forum, because it's just people sharing experiences with the afterlife or whatever happened.
How do you spell Quora? Quora. Never heard of it.
QUORA.com. And if you go to Quora.com/Hacking the Afterlife, you'll find us. And what I do is I moderate, the comments, and I make sure that nobody gets snarky or vitriolic. And if they do, I blink them into the cornfield, meaning the form disappears from them. So they can't, I'm sure you get a lot of those snarky things or whatever. And my thing is like, dude, there's plenty of other sandboxes to play in. Go give, and this is an interesting thing I talk about, talking about the afterlife is a little bit like skydiving. Everyone has an opinion about it until they step out of the plane. And then it's an experience. And you can talk about an experience, but your opinion about stepping out of the plane is something else. So I think it's great you're sharing people's experiences.
Yeah, well, I think that we've got to demystify all this stuff, get it out of the woo-woo box and make it a part of our operating system. It's like this is the way the galactics communicate. It's their default setting. They have this telepathy and empathy. And I think humans, as we evolve into the next existence on planet Earth, we have to expand those abilities. We have to bring them back online. I have a show called Spirit Speaks, who myself and another medium get together and we answer questions from the audience. She does more of the dead people thing. She's more of an expert in that. And I do more of the guidance thing, talking to the mob, the galactic mob, the councils, the spirit guides, the higher self.
I like that.
Well, I like to make it really real because, the thing about this, we talked about, we didn't even get into the Pope. I wanted to talk about the Pope, but we've run out of time. I look at all these men dressed up in their robes, representing spirituality on earth, and they're all men. And I think to myself, we've got to take it off this pedestal and put it on the couch in your tracksuit pants, that you can be connected to the divine, and you can be talking to spirit or Jesus or Buddha or Sri Rukteshwar or Yogananda in your tracksuit pants, eating your packet of chips, watching television. You can do it. You don't have to dress up in robes and be in a holy city with gold around you. We've sort of put it up on this pedestal that it's only for the special or the anointed.
Plus he's a Sox fan. He's from Chicago, my hometown.
For everyone. I know you've posted so much stuff about the Pope. We didn't even get. Thanks, Edie. Great show. She says, thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Rich,
everybody.
Always a blessing and always so much fun to be with you. You're doing amazing work. I just want to, the mob here, I just want to honor you for the work you're doing. Yeah, I know I'm not going to say that. And I'll tell you offline. And
come on, say, when are you going to tell me? What did they say?
Loud mouth. He said he's got a very loud mouth, but they're using it as a you're getting the message out there that that you're getting the message out there, and they just want to honor you for the work you're doing and to make this more mainstream and with fun and humor. They're really honoring you, and I honor you too. Thank you so much for coming back on the show, and thanks everyone for tuning in on Mother's Day. And to remember to love and evoke that mothering spirit in all of us. Big love and blessings to everybody.
Love.
Bye for now.